welcome indeed. Thank you very much for coming out. Suzanne Slick, the curator of the show, myself, Charles, curator of the museum, and we're going to tell you a bit about this show, and then we're going to encourage you to look hard because there's great stuff there. Okay, so my role in this, let's talk about the what and why. Well, the why is easy to talk about because we had better than most cities' art schools ever dreamed of being or ever achieved. We had talent. Our students had talent, the faculty had talent, and they were serious. This was a time that artists took art more seriously than many do today. You know, there's a lot of different applications, a lot more applications, and a lot more for art, and a lot more career choices in art. But there's a point in America where the artists saw this as life or death. Whether you're talking about visual artists or poets or musicians, it was a serious, serious game. And we were very lucky to have art faculty that felt that way and that drove that point home to the students. So the why was pretty easy. We have this great thing. And I've been here 16 years now, and the story got told to me so many different times through the 16 years. Sometimes I just have to say, yes, Betty, I know, you told me that last year. But those of you who know Betty, she's going to tell you again anyway, particularly a little whippersnapper like me from the East Coast. You got to get this right. So the why was easy, but how it came about was a little trickier because we thought, remember the show Fort Wayne 6 that we did? I didn't have my history straight yet and somehow felt those 6 people were the art school leadership, and some of that was right and some of that was wrong. It was a great show, but it didn't tell the whole story. So what was the whole story though? I went down to Indianapolis to the Long Sharp Gallery to have a dinner in honor of Dale Enix. And Dale Enix was a student at the school. I don't think he ever taught, but we were the only people from Fort Wayne there that night. And Dale was so happy, delighted that people came from Fort Wayne. And I thought, I don't know this artist, but why is he so happy that somebody came from Fort Wayne? You know, he was treating us like we just came from New York City. And he said, oh, let me explain to you, Charles. Even though we've just met each other, you don't understand that I went to the Fort Wayne School of Art, and yet in my professional career, Fort Wayne hasn't stayed with me, you know, and it meant enough to you to come down to see your show. Well, I did, but I wasn't coming down to see his show because Dale had been at the art school. I'd seen Dale's work. I knew I wanted to go to the show to see great work. But it was an interesting thing he was saying, so we started telling stories. And Dale told wonderful, marvelous, you know, moving stories, some that brought us each to tears as we thought about different times and different people that had been involved and messages imparted to him that sometimes were art lessons and sometimes were life lessons. And I thought, this is amazing, and I know right now tonight, by the end of this meal, I'm committing to 2 things. I'm committing to I'm committed to 3 things: buying Dale's work, having a solo show of Dale's work, and doing a special show about the Fort Wayne Art School. So I came back, and I thought, we gotta get on this. You know, we gotta get on this. And Sue had gone to the art school. And I thought, you know what? You got to curate this show because I'll learn the history with you. I'll be delighted to do that. But I'm not going to feel it. I'm just going to know it. And you're going to know it and feel it. And so you hauled out resources that most of us didn't even know existed. Tell us a little bit about that process.
Well, it started with Betty, as you might imagine. She's the authority on the history, so I went to visit her a few times last summer and came back to the museum with boxes and boxes of all kinds of ephemera, catalogs, and gathering all this historical material. One thing led to another. Alumni started to hear about the show. Social media helped a lot. Facebook has a group of former students. So I started fishing for donors or loaners for pieces to bring in, and was overwhelmed with the numbers and the offers and the generosity. And I see people here today who were very generous in loaning pieces. Ron Burt behind you brought several of his father's treasures. His father, Clyde Burt, taught ceramics at the art school for decades. I see alumni here as well, and there were just so many people who offered help. Diane as well. We have a couple of faculty who are still living who came in and helped as well. Hector Garcia and Don Cruzy. Dixie here brought several of Norm's pieces for us to use, and more history photographs, stories, ephemera. There's a lot of emotion around this school and the history of the school, which we tried to capture. And one of the challenges was that the school was active for over 100 years. So we couldn't tell that whole big story. We told a slice of the story. The timeline is behind you with details of how it started. And then we leap into the faculty who were there at the end on Berry Street in the 80s and 90s. The school moved in 1991, I think it was, to IPFW. So it stops at that point. Although a form of the school still exists as part of the Purdue Fine Arts and Graphic Arts program.
Well, and isn't it wonderful, though, that you could have a century-long history that morphs into a new thing that we hope has centuries to come? I mean, that's marvelous. And to do it, I mean, nothing's absolutely seamless, but it was fairly seamless for those involved along the way, even seamless to the point where the museum, branched off and went on their own. A lot of times it doesn't happen seamlessly. A lot of times one of the two parties doesn't make it through the transition. And everybody came out alive, and hope we all have good centuries in front of us.
Right, there were so many huge things that happened. I mean, the Lou Kahn project next door was going to be the new home for the art school. Well, that didn't take off and happen. 1976, the school broke away from the museum, which, is important to us. That's our history too. It took 15 years for them to move out to the campus, though, so they existed on Berry Street for all of that time. And so when I was a student there, we were part of IU, but my art classes were down on Berry Street, and I went out to the campus for my academic courses. So my degree says Indiana University on it. And I think Dale Enochs was also an IU grad, though he was there a little bit before I was. So the pieces that are in the show are mostly from the faculty that I knew. There were so many other faculty members before that I just had no idea how to find work from. So it starts with Russ Settle, George McCullough, Noel Dusenshine, Norm Bradley, Clyde Burt, Hector Garcia, who am I forgetting? Les Moats, Don Cruzy, thanks. Yeah, Gabe DeLobe as well.
Well, and this process, more than any show I've seen in years, was a lengthy months-long series of conversations. And Sue almost daily would come upstairs and say, you gotta hear this one. I heard this tale today, and no one, and you think, wow, that's pretty cool. Or better yet, sometimes, look at this piece of art that somebody loaned. Look at this photograph of somebody working. And it kind of brings it right back to you. You think, breathes a life into the history that's remarkable. And sometimes in the course of the show, when we've had students from either St. Francis or IPFW here, many of the students only know these people through pictures. It's like, sort of like George Washington and the Founding Fathers. He probably was old when he was born, You think, did he always look like that? And Jefferson and all these guys. So when they come down and they say, who was that? They say, oh, that was George McCullough. He was like 22 years old and he was, wow, I've heard about that guy, but he didn't look like that. It's like, well, he looked like you when you're 22 in a way, except they were cooler. But but you all know that anyway, right? But it's fascinating, I think, to get some kind of you're able to sew together the historical with the contemporary and have everybody feel that bond, and that bond and building on that history is what Fort Wayne needs to continue to be a great city for art. You need to know the anchors there, and then you need to know, now that you're in there, you've got a job to do. You got to be good. You got to take it as seriously as these artists did, and you got to be able to produce this kind of work. And I made a speech 10 years ago probably about how badly I wanted these schools to get graduate programs so that students would be in the studio longer. And it's just, it's the economics of higher ed. We want to have a graduate program, but somebody's going to make you justify how many students are going to take it, how much money will you make, and what will the schools see from this. So it may not happen. But I look at it now that we have this show and we've worked on this, I think I wanted the graduate school because I wanted the graduate school students to be the role models for the younger undergrads. They look up to them. It's like, well, okay, here's who you look up to. Look up to these people. If you can paint, sculpt, draw, print like these people, you could become something. And if you look at your work and it's kind of wimpy by comparison, go back to work. That's what they would have told you to do, right?
Oh yeah, they did.
So as you started with text, and lots of different kinds of text, from notes to papers to the Roto, what was it called? The newspaper?
The rotogravure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. But then quickly that led you to people. So you had to start piecing together a social network that all wasn't on Facebook, right?
Right. And a couple of neat things happened just out of the blue. I'd be walking through the atrium and hear somebody talking about the old art school, and it would be someone my age whose grandmother went to school there. Those of us who were there in the 70s and 80s forget that the school was there on Berry Street for 70 years. So I captured stories and ephemera and so on from the family members of people who were there in the 1920s and 30s. And it's just amazing to me to look back at those things and realize they were having as much fun and learning the same kinds of things that we were in that old theme house on Berry Street, in the 20s, 30s, 40s.
Now, were people reluctant to tell you their stories, or?
Not at all. Oh no, they were so proud to share these things. And a couple came back later and brought me more things, like a report card from 1929 and a little print that someone's father made just before World War II. And he ended up dropping his art career and going off to war. And when he came back, he went on to some other career. But
That's so cool.
Yeah, he had those times there on Berry Street.
Precious memories.
It is precious. So yeah, people were proud to bring things in and to talk and to share ephemera and stories and to loan the art and to bring photographs in, and it kept happening. I'd run into people out just obscurely and they'd have some connection to the art school. So that was kind of an epiphany for me, I guess, that it touched so many people and so many families. And there were a lot of students who were multi-generational or had siblings there or whose parents were there, or spouses, or they met, their spouses. They're like Dixie.
And the thing, my first year here, 2003, the realtors showing me around, I got a 2-day period of time to buy a house. So we were at the museum, that's where she would pick me up and she'd drive me out to all these places. Well, driving me out to where she was recommending, suburbs, which I'd never lived in a suburb, we drove through the neighborhood. And I said, what's all this? These are neat historic homes. She goes, oh, crazy artists live here. and she kept, pedal on the metal, let's get to the sanity of the suburbs. And I thought, I'm not sure I believe that's true, And then later, in time, you'd piece together that, what did she mean it's a crazy art neighborhood? Did artists come to town and just automatically the realtor showed them the crazy neighborhood? Or did they know it? Was it on the grapevine, like the Underground Railroad? Or how did you find this out? But I didn't realize for a couple of years it was the home of the art school. And so naturally the buildings belonged there and people would buy houses in there and it made much sense. And actually, as I see people now working on those houses, it's so much of a positive experience to think that neighborhood, this house is getting redone, this house is getting redone, because it's charming. And if that history got lost so we could put in some downtown condos, I don't think that'd be a good thing. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but but I mean, really, wouldn't you rather be? I mean, I left the suburbs, by the way, and moved over in the '07 because I had a chance to buy a 100-year-old house that I could spend the rest of my life paying for. Oh, the plumbing, oh, the electricity, oh, yeah, exactly. But what seemed crazy was the predictability of the suburbs, and I guess it could be good if you want, but I love an old house, and these old houses from the school were just tremendous.
Yeah, and the school was, I think, kind of a grounding force in the West Central neighborhood, kind of the cultural core, if you will, of the neighborhood. And it's interesting that you brought up old house problems, because going back through the minutes for decades, there are lots and lots of comments about the leaky roof and the plumbing and the boiler that wasn't working, and that was how the Art League formed in 1937. They kept having problems with the boiler, and so this group of helpful women got together and decided that they would raise money. They had fashion shows and bake sales and lectures and dances and all kinds of things to raise money and to support the art school and museum. It's still there. The theme home is still standing, and it's a private residence. It's sold again just recently, and it's been restored. It quit being the school in 1991, so became residential after that. So now the art department is in the newer building out at Purdue. And it's a wonderful big facility, very well equipped. And over the years, they kept trying to build a new school. And in the 40s, they brought Saarinen in, and he designed this wonderful facility. It was going to reside in Foster Park. And I had never heard anything about that before, but found a brochure over at the History Center describing that. And like the Kahn project, it ran out of funding and just couldn't get off the ground. So that was around the time that Mossman stepped up and gave the Castle building on Wayne Street, which is now the Castle Gallery. And the school then acquired B building and C building, and it built the geodesic domes because they were outgrowing the A building, the big theme house. So they kept just snapping up what they could because there were more students and more programs and more activities, and they were bursting at the seams. So when the Kahn project came along, that was going to be the solution to all of those problems. They were going to build the school right out behind the museum, where we weren't here then, of course, but attached to the theater, and that was going to be the Fort Wayne Art School. But we know what happened.
The show we did about Kahn's work here, You know, Con had big dreams, you know, this, bring the school here, bring the theater here, bring the museum here.
The ballet, the history center, all of those
And
things.
each year, and it must have been depressing to everybody, but each year he'd come back for another series of meetings. He'd scale it back, scale it back, scale it back. How about we build a performing arts center? You know? So we went from 11 proposed buildings to the one.
To the one.
And then we did this. So, and of course now the talk is the arts campus is coming back to life, and Susan's got big plans, and we're just happy we're sitting here in the middle of all of it. So that's got to be a good thing.
And that was when the writing was really clear on the wall that the solution to blend with IU Purdue was the best thing for the survival of the school, to keep the faculty employed. They got tenure, which was a great thing. So they continued at Berry Street then until 91. And Nancy McCroskey and John Rayov, who are, see, Nancy's retired now, but John is still teaching. They came in right at the end, and John's assignment was to physically move the school. Oh. He had to make the plans for getting it relocated, and I just can't imagine. To the campus, yeah. He did that successfully, and he's still there. And they award hundreds of degrees every year in the arts, so they're doing well.
It's a good, strong program.
And it
it's
all
on a strong foundation.
Right. Started with J.O. Adams and William Forsythe coming to town to teach a sketching class in the 1880s.